I was in the mood for violently butchering hundreds of zombies. I'm sure you know the feeling. One of the many games I impulse bought during the Christmas sale of 2019 was one I'd never heard of prior, State of Decay Year 1 Survival Edition. It had zombies. I had Bloodlust.
Poor bastard. Well, let's see if he's got a wallet on him or something.
The game was a lot of fun. Plenty of bashing and shooting and smashing and looting and resource management and base building. A laugh though it may have been, State of Decay ultimately felt uneven and vaguely unfinished. I mean, in the story campaign, where you are introduced to Trumbull Valley, there's an entire part of the map near the end that's basically unused. Sod had surprisingly good atmosphere, but the art style didn't quite gel with me, and the fiddly and tutorial-less menu management made me feel like I only had a loose grip on what was going on. And I'm still amazed you can't crash through these fences. What the hell? There were other issues like vehicles not needing fuel and being unrepairable, but the game did its job and entertained me for a few dozen hours. The key word for this game though was potential. All the ingredients were there. I had heard a sequel had been released and had actually just undergone a massive update at the time, but I wasn't too convinced. I ultimately gambled, and on February 2021 I got State of Decay 2 without waiting for a sale. And of the hundreds of games I've played in my life, State of Decay 2 is in the top 3. My favourite trio includes Dead by Daylight and Fallout 3 because apparently I just love miserable gaming experiences, and these three give very different types of depression. And all of them are very, very flawed. But I love them. They're like my idiot children. State of Decay 2 is, mechanically speaking, almost a remake of the original, so there's been very little in terms of evolution. However, everything has been refined and works much better than before. So much so, I'd say this game is a textbook example of learning by your mistakes. Sort of. Admittedly, there's no story mode this time. The original story functioned well enough with some nice ideas, but perhaps the absence of a real story in the sequel allowed the team to focus on the open world free-for-all survival mode, and it was polished beautifully. Sort of. Starting as 3 desperate but somewhat nonchalant survivors over a year after the initial zombie outbreak, you must bash, shoot, smash, loot, resource manage and build up your base. And like in the previous game, there's permadeath. Did I not mention that? And not just any permadeath. There's no save scumming here. You have one shot. And I love the pressure, so I very rarely play below nightmare difficulty, and have exclusively played lethal for my past 40 or so runs. But that's now, and this was then. I remember it took nearly a dozen attempts to finally beat the game. I refused to step down from nightmare difficulty because I'm stubborn like that. But once I did it 4 times on then all 4 maps with all 4 leader types, I stepped it up to lethal zone using my legacy characters. And there were many more deaths. Of my original 4 nightmare games back in the day, 16 legacy survivors have died, and only 10 are still in the pool. You need to know what you're doing and have learned a few tricks to maximise the chances of survival and keeping your guys alive. Although the game is an open-world third-person shooter, it doesn't really demand as much on skill as knowledge. For example, I met this cheeky chap, or rather, he met me, and I suppose he should be congratulated. I never thought the cazadors of New Vegas could ever be topped as my most hated hostile NPC, but with the Bloodferals, it's personal. Many good survivors were killed before I learnt the tactic of jumping on your car and abusing the gunslinger skill. Also, the Impaler. Yeah, there are special infected called Freaks to spice up the gameplay just as there was in the first game, and just as there was in its daddy Left 4 Dead. Screamers and bloaters aren't that much of an issue once you know how to handle them, and although the formidable juggernauts command quite a presence, you can usually just run away from them. Bloodferals, however, have secured a very special place in gaming history. Hate, hate, hate. But in spite of everything I've said about them, I wouldn't change them. There's a nastiness and pressure to the survival, and as you increase in difficulty, the game pulls no punches. I just love it. I mentioned vehicles earlier, and yes, to sharply differentiate SOD from Left 4 Dead, you'll be driving around in a small sandbox a lot. The vehicles are unusual in many ways. Physics are often defied, and there's a flip car option and the stuck radio command. This is also useful on foot. Indeed, there's a lot of jank here, from blind zombies to headless zombies to God knows. Yeah, it's all rather silly, but I find it endearing and I can see the funny side. The game does feel a bit mad at times. Looks like the zombie could use a stuck command as well. But one thing I unambiguously dislike is the inventory system, specifically the slot system. It makes no sense that a single 22 bullet weighs as much as a freaking armchair. Yes, I know there's weight independent of the slot, but the slot is what really matters, and how much items stacks is inconsistent. I was playing a lot of This War of Mine at the time. Oddly enough, it's another scavenger game with permadeath, and it had a similar inventory system. And I hated it then as well. Games like System Shock 2 or some of the Resident Evils had certain items take up more slots than others, but that's just polishing a turd and still has all sorts of problems. But at least those games didn't have dedicated slots to a melee weapon and guns and a rucksack. I mean, what's the point of that? You can't carry anything else in those slots, so it pays to load up those slots while scavenging so you can free up more slots and loot more stuff. Honestly, nothing beats Fallout 3's inventory management. Every item has a number. You have a number. You can only carry as much as that number before being over-encumbered. The Long Dark did something similar, better even, and it's just a vastly better system. Back to State of Decay 2, menu navigation isn't as confusing as it was in the previous game, but it's still a pain. Even after about 1300 hours, I still forget what everything does and where everything is, and I frequently forget about certain functions I could use, functions that could well have saved me. This kind of works in the game's favour though. You can never have everything and often find yourself making do with whatever you can. It complements this ragtag band of survivors vibe. But can't the menus be better? Why are there menus within menus? Why do I have to scroll down in such a small box? Maybe high-level facility actions could be grayed out and can only be used once you upgrade the relative facility? As is, they don't show up at all. Or at least an option where you can view your base inventory to be 5 or even 6 blocks wide instead of 3. Convenience just wasn't a priority here. I mean, the character select screen doesn't even fit all the characters on the screen at one time. I don't want to give the wrong impression. Ultimately, these issues don't distract from the tense survival atmosphere that makes this game so very special. But between human NPC AI not being very good, one headshot killing most enemies, thus negating high damage plays, and fire being a tad overpowered, it's fair to say the game's far from perfect. What of the plot? The events of State of Decay 2 present Blood Plague, which is a zombie virus. Another zombie virus, on top of the old zombie virus. Presumably it broke out of a lab of redundancy. Blood Plague has caused plague hearts to spawn around the map, and you need to destroy them all. It does feel like a bit of a chore once you've done it enough times, but it's usually a tense experience to load up a character with what they need for the assault and then carry it out. Once all the plague hearts have been destroyed, the game sort of meanders about. Now you need to finish the leader quest, but with the main threat dealt with, it all feels anticlimactic. It reminds me of Fallout 3 Broken Steel, where the plot just keeps going without the stakes. I'm surprised to make these Fallout comparisons. Maybe I should get back to the Capital Wasteland. But whatever, like with Fallout 3, the story is just an excuse plot for you to express your freedom. Outside this loose guidance, you make your own story with whatever the game rolls for you. For example, the run will spawn random enclaves for you to help or dismiss at your choice. You might meet the auto mechanics, the eccentric zombie hunters, some remnant soldiers, a cannibal clan, various hostile survival groups, a serial killer that won't join you because you're too creepy, and many more. However, I don't get these groups much anymore. I only ever seem to get the alcoholics. Almost every run. Your individual community members also get personal quests. These can range from looking for a brother cop, finding the arsenal of a famous military sniper, hunting down a drug dealer's stash, and many smaller personal goals.
Are you quoting a movie?
However, like before, there's one quest that seems to spawn a disproportionate amount of times. Oh, fuck off. I mentioned the leader quest earlier, and once a leader for your community has been decided, it will start a path. I have mixed feelings about this. Leaders can build exclusive structures, but you can always demote the leader, then keep the structure. That wasn't too well thought out. It's a bizarre development choice, and it gets worse in the midst of the main quest, the closest thing we have to a story. The trader, for example, needs to build a trading depot and has a quest revolving around making alliances and setting up trade deals. This is the best one and is consistent. The warlord needs to build an armory and spends their quest finding the best ordnance and killing anyone who gets in the way. So it's also quite consistent. But then there's the builder. That's a very nondescript leader type. I mean, they're all builders, surely. The builder's special building is a sniper tower. Okay. And then there's the sheriff, who has an interesting quest solving crimes and settling disputes, but their main building is a field hospital. That's not consistent. Couldn't the sheriff have the sniper tower? Would that make too much sense? The builder can have the field hospital and be renamed the doctor or something. Listen to me whinge. Part of the fun is that, at least for the first few runs, you don't know what the game will throw at you. Lone survivor needs rescuing, hostile survivors need killing, and various other lone missions and the mysterious broadcasters. Mysterious broadcasts often revolve around Red Talon, a sort of resistance group your community interacts with as part of the world building in the background. The network is another off-screen faction. Your survivors will voice their preferences or distastes for either of these groups, but the plot doesn't go anywhere with it. Still, it's a refreshing extra dimension. I had actually stopped playing State of Decay 2 for over a year, but when I came back I was in for a very pleasant surprise. The team had introduced a massive update that introduced, amongst other things, the Curveball mechanic. And I adore this edition, I can't state that enough. Curveballs are random events that happen in the game world, ranging from bizarre loot opportunities, temporary beneficial or detrimental zombie mutations, strange things happening to your community, and so much more. This perfectly complements the random unpredictable game style the developers had always gone with. The result is sometimes uneven. Here we're seeing a mutation where zombies drain your stamina, drop scent lure when killed, have enhanced senses, and are a good bit more resistant to fire. All next to a black plague heart that drains your health when you enter its radius. I actually kind of love it. There is a feel like a lot of these combos actually haven't been tested. For example, there's one variant of the News Travels Curveball where you can buy for cheap and sell for expensive to the same person. This is an infinite money glitch that I can't believe didn't get patched out. And no, I don't normally use it, I'm just demonstrating. But again, in spite of, or even because of, this jank, I just adore it. It's like the devs are these mad scientists just doing whatever. There's another curveball where zombies violently explode when they die, and I don't have footage of that right now, but take my word for it. It's a blast. And I mentioned Black Plague Hearts, and let me tell you, these boys are very cool. They represent a real threat and really up the stakes. But best of all, you can customize the frequency, intensity, and how good or bad these curveballs are at any time. Naturally, I've been mostly playing Lethal Zone Plus and having a great time with this new challenge after the game had become stale and easy. So I'm living in a SOD 2 renaissance right now, which is kind of ironic actually. Official support for State of Decay 2 recently ended, but massive props to Undead Labs for giving dedicated support to a mostly single-player game several years after release. Naturally, with us all saying goodbye to SOD 2, I realised now's the perfect time to make a series of videos discussing it. Why am I so savvy? I've just got a lot to say. So with all that positivity, I have the overwhelmingly British instinct to talk about something negative, so the Daybreak DLC. I don't like it. It was a grindy and repetitive load of nonsense, and it's also a testament to the game being one with knowledge, not skill, fragile armoured zombies being the most important. And why am I playing this? It's to unlock overpowered additions to the game that make the experience feel cheap. Contractors, FOBs, crazy weapons. It's all rather bloated and takes some of the addictive tension out of the game that I always enjoyed. So forget Daybreak. I have nicer things to say about the Heartland DLC, which did restore something of a story to the universe, and allowed us back to SOD 1's Trumbull Valley. Although I'm sure I remember that we wanted to evacuate after we saw this. Well, whatever. At least Heartland is a coherent narrative experience, and it actually gets expanded upon should you play on Trumbull Valley in survival mode. Even if, no spoilers, but it's very strange. Another aspect of Heartland is it did a better job with dialogue assignments. Let me explain. Every character in the game needs to be able to talk to everyone else. And besides making all the characters feel rather flat and one-dimensional, it often makes conversations feel disjointed and weird. The voice actors had to record the same lines with every character to try and build the illusion of these characters interacting, and it just doesn't work. The worst offender is the barter window.
Hey there, business partner.
Sounds good.
What the hell is this?
What you got?
Yeah.
It's all very immersion breaking. What I'm saying is the survivors feel like copy-pastes of each other with very little in terms of personality, despite great effort going into making them unique, with hundreds of traits and looks and skills and the like. But what I love most about State of Decay 2 is how it gives the player a chance to craft their own narrative. And that's exactly what I've done. My legacy pool has 44 characters, each of which has a story to tell. Each of them is a snowflake in their own way, and despite them being a bit special, you do grow to care for your community.
Even one life lost is too many.
Losing a survivor hurts in this game, and if I allow myself to have emotional investment, it can really hurt like nothing else I've ever played. XCOM didn't do it this good. So I've got dozens of little stories in my head about each and every one of my survivors to make the drama all the juicier and the stakes all the higher. I've also designed my own classes for survivor builds, as well as my own game modes of self-imposed challenges. They're partially my own creation and partially what I've seen other YouTubers do. So that's what I'm going to make my new series of videos about. My elite survivors going up against near impossible challenges. I need to discuss my classes and game modifiers, and then we can talk about my legendary team of hardened apocalypse survivors and the stories they have to tell. In a testament to my bizarre variant of autism, I kept an Excel spreadsheet full of information and key events for each character. Don't look at me like that. I'm a writer at heart, so I have a huge story to share. I hope you'll indulge me as I continue to set the stage.